Hey there, I'm Kevin Downey, and I run an agency called Kevin M. Downey where we help B2B companies with their sales and marketing efforts. You can visit our website at kevinmdowney.com. Okay, today's topic, this is a huge one because it's like years in the making. It's been coming down the pike for years. Is the most common challenge that B2B companies are facing going into 25. So this is something that's been evolving for years since I started my agency, certainly, and before that. And then it really got exacerbated by COVID. And in 24, I heard the same phrase probably more often, certainly more often than in any year that I've been in business. And that is, cutting to the chase, business is pretty good, but not great. And our reps are not generating enough leads for themselves. That is the key thing that I've been hearing. Been hearing it for years, kind of evolving into different ways of thinking about it and saying it, but it really came to fruition in 24. I heard this year more than any other. Our reps are just not generating enough leads for themselves. Okay, so this is what we're going to talk about is what are the patterns that companies do in the history there, and then ultimately what is the solution to this problem in B2B. Okay, and it obviously depends. So there is no single solution for any B2B company because it depends on so many different factors and variables. And I'm going to get into all of that, but there is a starting point for you to identify how to fix this problem, right? Okay, so where does this all come from or stem from? So in the old days, you were a B2B company, you needed to add more sales to your company, you went and hired more sales reps, right? It was that simple. You need sales, we go hire more salespeople, right? They do their own prospecting, they do their own boots on the ground, or they hit the phone hard or whatever. They build a customer base, build a business, go hire another rep, right? That's how you build sales. So why isn't this working nearly as well for companies, and in some cases not at all anymore, for B2B companies? So getting a hold of companies and people within B2B companies or in businesses to identify decision maker and ultimately pain point has just gotten harder, right? Phone isn't getting answered. Companies don't even have receptionists anymore. You can't get anybody to recall you back off of voicemail, which I'm going to talk about that at the end. There are so many different things, but the sales reps are frustrated because they can't get a hold of enough people and they don't really want to cold call in the first place, which is a whole separate conversation I talked about on a podcast recently. That dedicated business development, hardcore cold outreach is not the same talent or dots. If you look at traits or predictive index, culture index, Acumax, the traits, the hard wiring of a person that's going to be really good at cold outreach is nothing like a farmer salesperson, account executive, account manager who wants relationships and is going to continually sell, upsell, cross-sell, increase sales, and deal with a customer base. Those are two totally different wiring patterns. So those account executive, account managers, if they'll do their prospecting, they'll kind of take their medicine to build their customer base, or they would. But it's gotten so hard to get a hold of people, they get frustrated, they just don't want to do it anymore, right? They just get completely, burnt out by the thought process, right? So this is what companies are facing. And in the old days, again, we would just go out, hire sales reps, they'd prospect, build a customer base, and away you go. And you just kept adding sales reps. And over time, this has gotten harder and harder and harder, as I've talked about. Can't get a hold of decision makers, can't get companies to answer the phone. Nobody's returning phone calls. You send manual emails, they don't respond to them. You go on LinkedIn, they don't respond to that. And it becomes very, very frustrating for your sales reps and then frustrating for principals and sales managers because the reps are sitting there collecting these base salaries and not building a customer base, or it's just taking way, way, way too long. And this is the common theme that we're hearing, all right? So as this has become and evolved more as a problem, slowly we have seen companies not hiring more salespeople to add sales, but they have swung the pendulum the other way. And yes, they've started to add their CRM and automated email through their CRM, which ultimately isn't going to work well enough, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But they've added that in, but now they've swung to the other side and gone to their marketing people. And they've said, marketing people, we have these salespeople. They are not generating enough leads for themselves. We need leads for these salespeople. We are spending these base salaries on these people, and we need to get them leads. It's taking too long for them to build a customer base to get ROI out of these reps. And the marketing people do their marketing thing. The marketing people in business-to-business companies generally speaking, are awesome at what they do, but building business development lead generation systems is not the main is not the thing they're good at. They're good at building collateral and website and SEO, and they do PPC, and they'll book trade shows, and they can do graphical stuff, and they can do videos, and they'll book webinars, and they know how to do messaging about your company, all of which it drives good quality leads, but it's intermittent at best, right? Trade shows in particular and PPC being the two things I hear that work for companies, but never drive enough leads or not consistently day after day drive leads, which is what companies need. And so the marketing people have all of this stuff that's awesome. And when they do get prospects to their website, everything they've done comes to fruition and it exponentially increases the conversion rates. And they do a great job with what they do, but they don't build business development systems. That's not what marketing people do. After, again, 10 years in business, having done email for 7 years and sent 100 million emails and done all the things that I do to drive leads for clients and building lead generation systems and working with marketing people as well as, CSOs and VPs of sales and principals, marketing people aren't business development system builders. That's not what they do, right? And I'm going to explain why in a minute, the type of messaging and why it's different than what sales does and why sales is better at it in general. And then, of course, we've got their weak point and then the solution to this whole problem, right? So they've gone back to the marketing people, and the marketing people do all this stuff, and the marketing people don't really drive leads day after day after day. Everything they've done accentuates or exponentially increases our conversion rates on the lead generation efforts we do have going, but I'm not getting lead flow day after day after day from their efforts, right? Because that's not what they've built. They've built marketing stuff, not business development stuff, which is part of marketing and part of sales at the same time. So what do you do? How do you solve this problem? How do you think about solving this problem as a principal in a B2B organization? So business development systems start, first of all, there's only two media that are going to solve daily inbound lead flow for a B2B company. Only two, right? It's going to be high volume email or reps doing manualized outreach. Usually it's both, and I'll get into that in a minute and why it's both. But those are the only two things that are going to drive leads day after day after day, right? LinkedIn, that's not going to work to drive leads day after day. Want proof of that? We run email for 2 LinkedIn agencies and drive leads for them. And we drive more leads for them with email than they do with their own system. So LinkedIn is not going to be there, right? Is LinkedIn part of business development manual process at some point for sales sometimes? Is that a medium you might use? Sure. But that's not an anchor for lead generation or business development, right? So how do we think about building a business development system that is going to drive us inbound leads for day after day after day? Okay, so it starts with, we go on Apollo, so we use Apollo for our clients. And for email, it is sometimes the CMS or the system we use for email marketing. It's not always. Sometimes we're building off SmartLead. Also, there's Instantly out there, which we've never used, and other things out there. But in the case of our email and the way we build and the best systems out there, we've seen Apollo and SmartLead be the two best CMSs, and it all depends on your vehicle for delivery. I talk about that in other videos. Anyway, email can be your anchor. If you go into Apollo and we build the search sets, right? So it's what I do with clients all the time, prospects and potential clients, is we're building a search set of your target audience. We're using keywords, we're using industries, we're using employee count, annual revenue. Do they have this type of person in the company? Do they utilize this kind of technology? And then, of course, the titles of the people we need to reach out to. And we build those search sets or lists, and we look at the total number. If that total number is greater than 100,000, that email, high volume email, can be the anchor, right? It's not the only thing you do, but it can be the anchor of your business development system, all right? If that total list is in the thousands, low tens of thousands, it is definitely a manualized outreach thing from a rep side. So it's going to be a rep thing. It could be your sales reps. It could be dedicated business development reps. But it's going to be a rep thing when the list is small. Why is that? Let me explain it really quick. When we're building email systems, we don't want to email people any more than once a month. So in order to, when we build layers of systems, we think about them in doing 6,000 a day. So 5,000 a day, 6,000 a day times 20 days is 100,000 a month or more. We don't want to hit these people more than once a month, right? That helps, that'll eradicate or hurt our infrastructure, right? The health of our email infrastructure. Then we don't have enough people to go after and hit them once a month. right? To be the anchor of our inbound lead generation, right? And so then when we get into the low thousands or so low tens of thousands, email's definitely not the anchor. It's all a rep thing, right? So again, sales or business development reps. Now, what if it is in between? We go to build the search sets and we're 50,000, 75,000, something like that. It's really a hybrid, but you have to think that email cannot be your anchor unless you have 6 figures and more contacts to go after, right? The more the number of contacts you have, the more high volume email or high powered email, as we like to call it, can be important in your business development process, but it's not going to be as much your anchor as your contact list goes down, okay? Now, I talk about this in other videos and on podcast interviews. When we talk about email, what kind of email do I mean? And I'm not going to go into all the infrastructure stuff on this video today. We mean high-powered one-to-one text-based email that's designed to elicit a response. In fact, the cold outreach type email that we do to drive leads is the exact same thing on the front end of a cold call. We're reaching out. We're asking, not sure if you're the right person to contact. Sometimes you would know that it is, but curious if you have this pain point. If you do, we can help you solve it. Maybe here's a little bit about how. Here's what I want you to do next. That's cold outreach methodology 101, right? So when we build that, it can be via email and or reps. It doesn't matter. It's still the same thing, all right? With email, we're eliciting a response. So the health of our infrastructure is very important. So to get email response, we have to elicit a response. We have to ask them to reply. We're not trying to drive them to a link. We're not trying to drive them to a landing page or to a calendar. We're eliciting a response, right? Now, why? 2 reasons. We're, again, trying to keep the health of our infrastructure high, which means we have to get engagement. Engagement, reply is real engagement from an email algorithmic standpoint for Google and Microsoft and other systems. Your domain and email addresses getting replies is an indicator, the key indicator of the health of what you're doing, right? So you got to drive response. The other thing that does, though, is it helps you identify decision maker and some level of pain point. Might be only general pain point and not specific pain point at that moment, but you're identifying pain point, okay? I'll get into the general and specific stuff in a minute. So we're doing the same thing with email that we would be doing with reps, and I'm going to get to the solution when the numbers are really low in terms of contacts to go after. But we're doing the same thing with email that we are with reps in a cold outreach situation, right? If I'm training reps to do cold outreach, we're asking the same question on the front end. Hey, I'm trying to find out if you're the decision maker. Do you handle this? Can I send you some stuff on our company? So they are interested enough to take a look, or at least they tell you they are. And then we're going to send it and we're going to gather intel on the call and move the needle, right? To try to drive them to a call for sales, or if it's sales, then they're already on the call, right? That is business development process or system 101. So again, let's go back. If email's our anchor, we got enough high volume email to drive inbound leads. Usually sales is taking care of those inbound leads, following up with them, sending them stuff, following up with them, and moving the needle that way. Or sometimes it might be a dedicated BDR or SDR team handling those inbound leads, right? But then in addition to that, any sales or business development reps that we do have, also in responding to leads that are coming in from email, they are also doing very targeted niche outreach. Right? You need to do that because within companies, there's always a narrow list, no matter how big your prospect list size is. And we have one client whose prospect list size is almost 1 million, but they have a niche audience of about that contact list is only a handful of thousand. I think it's like 5,000 or 6,000. That's a rep thing. They have reps that are dedicated to that industry. That is their core, highest converting, highest purchasing industry that they go after with what they sell. Okay. So it's always both. And again, email can be your anchor if you've got 6 figures of contacts to go after. Okay, so now what if they're not, right? Or what if it's not? What if it's a rep thing? Let's go into a low volume number and think about this, because this is the harder one for companies to deal with, is when we've got very narrow lists or relatively narrow lists to go after. How do we build a business development system without email being our anchor that is going to get us ROI faster, get us our leads faster, and how do we think about that? So in the extreme situation, and probably a rarer case, if you have a sales team whose prospect list size is in the hundreds per rep, maybe 1,000, right? That's a rep thing. Let the reps go do that. It might be boots on the ground. It might be inside, but that prospect list size is small enough that the reps can be their own anchor. They can do their own thing at that point, right? Now, otherwise, if we have dedicated business development going on, and it could be with your new sales reps, new hires, it could be with dedicated business development, sales development reps, whatever you want to call them, how do we have to think about what we need to drive the leads that we need for the sales team or the sales team to drive for themselves? So prospect list size per rep is, roughly speaking, they can reach out to about 1,000 companies per month in a manualized outreach situation without a dialer. And dialers really aren't that effective anymore. There are very, very rare situations in certain kinds of companies where it makes sense to still do that. But generally speaking, for the clients we deal with, it's a very uncommon thing to implement a dialer. So you've got your reps doing manualized outreach by phone, email, maybe using a little bit of LinkedIn, but really not as much anymore. How do you go about thinking about this process? Well, they can hit about 1,000 a month. You want them to cold outreach to prospects, let's say once a quarter, right? So we're thinking about a list of about 3,000, so 1,000 to 5,000 companies, and all of the contacts that are within those companies that they're going to be doing outreach to, and that's how you identify the number of reps you need to do consistent business development outreach. And this is assuming that budget isn't an issue. If it's an issue, then obviously you can only start with one or two or something like that if you're really small. But at the end of the day, that's how you have to think about it, okay? So now they're doing their business development process, cold outreach. What are we trying to achieve? Well, the same thing with email. We're trying to identify a decision maker within the company. If you're targeting owners, typically you're not going to have to worry about that as much, because if you're targeting small business owners, they're going to be the decision maker, right? You're targeting to try to find out who the decision maker is and whether or not they have a pain point enough to talk to your company and talk to one of your salespeople, right? So what does that mean? So we have general pain point and specific pain point. So I'm going to give you an example that if your company does industrial waste processing for companies, you're trying to build a list of all companies that have industrial waste, obviously. But one of the things you have to reach out to, besides finding decision makers, find out do they produce hazardous waste? That's your general pain point. You don't know if they have a solution to that problem. They obviously must have already, right? Or they get in trouble with someone. So they probably have a solution for already. So if they produce hazardous waste, now they're a target or a prospect, but not really a lead yet, because you don't know if they have a pain point enough to want to talk to you. So do they have a system in-house to process that hazardous waste? Do they have a vendor already that they're using to process that hazardous waste? And so now you know that they're a target, but you have to keep staying in front of them until they have enough pain point to want to talk to one of your salespeople, right? So that is the difference between specific and general pain point. But with the cold outreach side on business development side that's manualized, and we're not using email as the anchor and we're having reps do it. So think about, again, those numbers on the prospect list size per rep. How do we think about that? Should salespeople be doing it? Should they not be doing it? Should be doing dedicated business or sales development type reps or team to do that cold outreach and generate leads or appointments for sales? Okay, so this comes down to your sales reps' salaries. How badly does it hurt their salaries and they're not generating enough leads, or it's taking longer to generate the leads they need to generate? How painful is that for you as a company, right? If it's painful enough that you're acknowledging it and you're saying, we need leads for our reps, these guys are taking too long, then you're going to have to implement something else, right? You're going to have to build them a system, but you're also going to have to implement dedicated business or sales development team to do the cold outreach for the reps, right? And that may mean contraction of sales team size. We are seeing that in some B2B companies. They're saying, we've got 14, 12, however many sales reps. I've got a handful with a full book of business. I got a few that are pretty full and they get their customers when they need to. But I got a whole bunch of my sales reps that are like half or less than half full or almost nothing, and they're not generating enough leads. Sometimes that means we have to contract sales team size. If they're not generating the requisite leads for the salary that they're collecting, some of them are going to have to be replaced, and with business development efforts, dedicated business development efforts, which again is email, which is very low cost, so that's not an issue, but dedicated business development reps who are less expensive, relatively speaking, that you can get ROI out of with a manualized outreach or a manualized approach. So what does that mean? Dedicated reps maybe in the United States. They could be in an office and doing it. They could be remote in the United States, or if you have to from a budgetary standpoint, we go down to Latin America, find the kids that have come to college in the US and gone back home to live, right? And they may need to be the anchor of your business development efforts, because you can't justify spending more than their salaries, let's spitball here, are $10,000 to $20,000 a year is their base, typically. Speak great English, very intelligent, great job, great experience in business. They understand what to do. You can teach them process and everything. may have to go that route, right? It kind of depends on your budget and how much effort you need to make, how many leads you're trying to generate, how many reps you have that need more leads. So it may mean contraction of sales team, increasing business development or sales development team, and that are going to be lower cost, relatively speaking, and you train them and you put them on a system that all they do is cold outreach or business development. You have dedicated reps just for that. Okay, so what if you say, well, I don't want to let go of any of my sales reps. I need to build a system and I need to get them generating more leads. So, we got to build them a system and a process, right? We've got to narrow their focus and we have to give them a dedicated amount of time per week that they need to be doing cold outreach. And that depends on how full their customer base is. So if their customer base is really full, right, they really don't need to be doing much cold outreach. Right? So think about it in terms of days of the week is the way we think about it a lot of times, sometimes hours in a day, but usually days of a week. How full is their customer base? And therefore, if it's 80% full, they need to dedicate it one day to cold outreach. If they're 60% full, they need to dedicate 2 days to cold outreach, 40% of their time. If they're only 40% full, they need to dedicate 3 days. If they're 20% full, they need to dedicate 4 days. And when we say dedicate, that means 6 hours a day plus, right? If you have very few customers as a salesperson and you've got to build a customer base and you're only 20% full, you shouldn't be having a whole lot of things that you need to do for your customers that you have. You should be doing some, but you should only be occupying about 20% of your time, right? Because the number of sales, the number of customers you have should be respective, relative to the time that you can take. So at the end of the day, we need 4 full days that we're doing. If that rep only has 20% of a book of business, we need 4 days where they're doing nothing but cold outreach. Sure, they can spend an hour a day on those other 4 days responding to emails, taking care of things so that stuff doesn't fall through the cracks. But they need to be doing dedicated cold outreach for 4 days, more or less. And if they're not willing to do that, then they need to go. Right? Or you have to bite the bullet as a company and give them dedicated business developments that's going to drive them decision maker contacts and leads. And that's up to you as a business. It's what kind of financial threshold do you have? How personally tied to the salespeople are you? So on and so forth. But at the end of the day, we have to rethink. We have to get to the point where our business development system is ROIing for our sales team. And if that means we need to let go of some salespeople and replace them with business development efforts, then that's what that means. That's part of what is evolving and happening in business-to-business companies these days. Okay, it all depends on how much do you have into your salespeople. How do they do with cold outreach? How much time are you willing to let go, or how long are you willing to wait to get ROI out of that sales rep or those sales reps? So you have to think about all of these things. But again, the base of it all comes down to prospect list size, the number of contacts. We build the lists in Apollo. How many contacts do we have to go after? If it's in the 6 figures, you got some email that's really going to pull a lot of weight for you, because and generally with outbound email, we're talking about 500 to 1,500 outbound emails to generate an inbound lead, all things being equal. So think of it this way. If your prospect list size is 20,000, right, and you run 1,000 emails a day, generally speaking, I'm going to expect on average, about a lead a day, right? That's not enough for a sales rep, right? 1 lead a day, that's not going to be enough. They need a number, especially if they don't have a full book of business or near full book of business, they need a lot of contacts to go after. So we always have to think about prospect list size. How much is email our anchor? And then are we doing niche outreach to a really targeted audience manually, or is that all we're doing? Whereas automated email may not be a fit because we don't have enough contacts to go after. And how do we generate leads? Like we build the system. How many business development reps to salespeople do we need as a ratio and all those things? And again, all of this is customized, and it's not a one size fits all. It starts with prospect list size and how we build the email system if there's enough contacts to go after. But then after that, everything is dependent upon you as an organization. Your sales team structure, how much money you pay them. Again, just worked with a client not that long ago. Base salaries in their company are 40, 50, 60,000, a little lower on the B2B side in what they do. So they don't hire quite as high end of a rep there in that space. And I would say, hey, if the reps are doing their cold outreach, you put them in a system and they got to do 4 days of cold outreach a week. And if they're not willing to do it, then they got to go. If they're doing it, they're going to generate enough leads and you're getting ROI out of them at those salaries in all likelihood. So they need to do their calling and their cold outreach and their business development. Maybe that means boots on the ground too. But at the end of the day, we have to build that system and that process. We have to measure them and they have to get results from the system. And it isn't all that hard. They don't need 3 months to figure out whether or not we're getting results from them. If we're getting what we need, it's month by month, week by week. We can tell. Are they making their calls? Are they generating the leads they need to generate? If they are, great, let them keep going. If they're not, got to go, right? Got to figure out a way to augment or supplement the lead generation that they're not doing for your company. Okay. And again, that system all starts with email as an anchor or dedicated reps doing cold outreach. It could be business development reps, sales development reps. It could be your sales reps themselves. But usually, again, it's a hybrid and a mix. And I talk about email at length in other episodes and in a couple podcasts. And that is ultimately how you got to think about it. Contact list size. How important is email as our anchor? And then building that system for the reps and then putting them to task, whether it's a sales team or a dedicated business development team. And how you do that is, or what reps you use all comes down to budget and a number of other things and how you think about business development for your company. Okay, thanks so much for being here. Really appreciate it. If you need help, reach out to us, kevinmdowney.com. Appreciate your time. Have a great day, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks.